we pull in at the birth center and our midwife is waiting for us at the door with a wheelchair, and we park in like the expectant mother's parking, which I was so excited to use at every appointment. I was like, we're going to get to park in that spot sometime. So I stand up out of the car and she was like, can you sit in the wheelchair? We'll go upstairs. We'll get in the tub. And I was like, I cannot sit on that, but I will walk. If you'll give me a minute, like to work through this one more contraction, I'll try. So at that contraction, I was like, I'm crowning. So I'm in the parking lot. It's 11, probably 15 at this point. And she was like, are you sure? I was like, yep. And there's the ring of fire. And I'm like pretty calm, like kind of praying through it, breathing through it. Like, thank you, God, for these contractions. Like I'm one more closer. And she was like, I said, Emily, his head is out. Like it's I can feel it. It's out. And she was like, okay, well, do you want to do this out here? And I was like, yep. And so she pulls my pants down. I'm leaning against the wheelchair. And then Bryan is like holding Jack's head and he's like, babe, he has your ears. And I'm like, great.
Getting pregnant and giving birth are two of the most exciting things you can ever hope to experience in this life. The moment you think you could be pregnant, you're frantically searching for all the best information, which is why you're here today. I'm Stephanie King, and with my many years of experience as a professional childbirth educator, doula, and lover of all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, I'm here to make preparing for your birth enjoyable, empowering, and totally easy. Each week, I'll cover different topics, interview professionals, and get into the nitty-gritty birth stories from mamas just like you. And when you're ready for more, you can join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I take you step by step through exactly how to prepare your mind, body, spirit, and partner for a birth you love. So let's get started. Our reviewer of the week is Katie, Mama 4, and she says, empowering and inspiring. I had felt so defeated after having a traumatic vaginal birth full of interventions and a painful C-section with my second. With my third, I wasn't even sure I wanted to even try for a VBAC as I had no confidence in my own ability to birth my baby. Then, as if by divine intervention, I found this podcast during that third pregnancy. It changed everything for me. I went from feeling like birth happened to me twice to going on to have 2 more babies via beautiful and redemptive VBACs, last one completely unmedicated. Stephanie does a great job informing mothers on their options and potential hiccups in the pregnancy and birthing process so listeners can make the best decisions for themselves and their babies. This podcast and the birth course are a must for any woman. My husband was also grateful for the easily digestible information from both the podcast and the course. I am forever thankful and still listen to the podcast weekly. Love, Katie. Thank you, Katie. That was a really incredible and redemptive story from you. So if you guys are listening here, redemption is part of the story. If you have had a rough go, I hope that you are here to heal and to enjoy your next birth, just in a most healing and incredible way. With me today, I have Ashley and Bryan. I'm so excited, you guys. This is a birth story, and I've heard a little bit of it, but I'm so excited for you guys to kind of hear the full thing. And I'm excited that Bryan is here because we love dads being on and having dad's perspective. So thank you both for being here today. If you will, tell us a little about yourselves, kind of your love story and your children and all of that kind of stuff. We'll have you do a quick intro, and then we'll dive into your pregnancy.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. We are both long-term listeners to the podcast and so grateful to be here. So we actually met 7 years before we got married, and we were just friends for a long time. We were a bridesmaid and a groomsman in our best friend's weddings.
Oh, I love that.
And so met leading up to their wedding. Yes. And yeah, so we were friends for a little bit and then got engaged and married within the same year. And then we were married 7 years before we got pregnant with our son, Jack, who was born May of 2023. And he's our first and only right now. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, we're living the dream, and listening to this good stuff has been a big part of that. So we're excited to talk about all the fun ways it came together.
Yes. And we're in Charleston, South Carolina.
Oh, fun. And I am excited to hear all about it. So with that, tell me a little bit about your pregnancy, Ashley. Was it pretty straightforward? Any morning sickness? Anything pop up during your pregnancy? Any of that stuff?
Yeah, I actually feel like I had the dream again with Jack. And so we I had super low key nausea kind of all day my first trimester, but like nothing a low sugar ginger beer wouldn't touch, and just very, very chill. Second trimester was great. I gained a really minimal amount of weight. I felt great. I worked out the whole time. Nothing crazy from like a health perspective other than towards the end, and we may get to this in a little bit, but I had a really low platelet count. So I started off a little low on the beginning, and then towards the end, dropped to the point where I was kind of on the fence if I was going to be able to deliver. We decided to deliver at a birth center, but we were kind of at the point where they were like, based on how this lab comes back, we might have to send you to the hospital. So lots of prayers and craziness throughout the pregnancy. But that was the only real kind of hiccup along the way. It was a really fun, easy pregnancy. I love being pregnant.
That's awesome. Bryan, did you feel the same way about her being pregnant? What was it like for you?
No, she was herself and joyful, and we were so thrilled about, adding Jack to our family. So, but, and having a plan with preparation for your body and for our home and kind of the support of you, I think was a big part of it too, because it, we could see the progress, of just some of the exercises you were doing. You're like, oh, at the beginning, it's a challenging thing, like the deep squat, you're doing. But then at the end, it was like, oh, I didn't even realize it had gone that far. It's like, it's been 15 minutes. It's like, oh, okay. When the first time it's like, has it been a minute?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's referring to your exercises. And I found your podcast through a friend, probably around, I think I was about 12 weeks pregnant. And then just kind of found it through Positive Birth Stories, and then just fell in love with it and binged the entire thing. And so I'm actually a physician associate by background. So I have a medical background, but didn't really know anything about birth coming even through going through PA school, and certainly not an unmedicated birth. And it was something that I think just through several friends decided that I wanted to do. I don't have anyone in my family that's done it. No really close friends, up until maybe last year that had done it. So finding the podcast for me was so helpful. And like Bryan was referring to, I started with the 3 exercises right on that first week of listening to it. And I remember even taking my first squat with him and like, okay, well, I made it 10 seconds. So we're going to call that a win. And then I remember I think it was like maybe 6 or 7 months in, I finally made it for 15 minutes without thinking about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, but I can speak to those exercises by the end. You were so grateful that you did them every single day. So yeah, it was stuff like that, I think, that gave me a rhythm. And I love doing difficult things with my body, kind of like you. I've done some half marathons and that kind of thing. And so for me, it was almost just like training for something physically. And so I loved pregnancy, labor, birth, the whole thing. I loved it.
That's awesome. Bryan, what was that experience like for you? Like, were you really helpful with her with the exercises? Did you help her make sure she had her protein? Were you involved with any of that?
I mean, I like to think I was helpful and supportive. I mean, it really was just, she knew what she wanted to do, and she is, a rock star. So when there's something that she wants to do, she's going to figure out how to do it. And so it was really just, being kind of encouragement, and you tell me what you want to eat and I'll figure it out. I do a lot of the cooking in our house, so it was amazing. There were a few times where you'd have like a really specific craving that was out of the blue, not like a like pickles and ice cream kind of thing, but like she wanted apricots one day, and then on something she was reading something about apricots during that specific week of Jack's development. He really needed it for like his eyes were whatever, and like in that week. So the how attuned she was to her body was super impressive to me. Like she said, I think I want sardines. And I said, we don't eat a lot of sardines in this house, but I found a pasta recipe. It turned out great. But, and then we later found out there was something specifically in sardines that was perfect for what he needed right then. So I would say encouragement and making cravings taste as good as they could were a lot of my role there.
He was a great coach. We had to do some spinning baby stuff. They told me at one of my ultrasounds, I can't remember which one, may have even been the 20 week or 20. They made me do another one at 28 weeks, but that he was breached. And it turns out that he wasn't. It's just something that the tech had told me. So I started doing a couple of spinning babies for a few weeks. And then we ended up doing pelvic floor PT. And so one of the things she had me do was some side lying stuff. So he was incredibly helpful with like the side lying L, just kind of getting my leg over the bed. So it was really fun to have a coach, living coach, nutrition coach, and exercise coach.
It did make me feel like I was part of things, at this point, in the middle there, it doesn't feel like you're very involved, but that was, it was kind of sweet.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that because it's true. I think you're not the only man to feel that way. There's like only so much that you can do. You're not the one growing the baby. You don't feel everything that's happening every day. So how can you be involved and then taking the initiative to do that? I think that's really powerful. That's great. All right, will you tell me about your providers? So did you have anything like, how did you pick your provider? What kind of provider did you have? Did you change at any time? And I'd love to hear any like questions that you used in order to vet that provider and know that you were with the correct one.
Yeah, this is a fun part of our story, actually. So like I said, I hadn't really planned even to necessarily go unmedicated or know that I absolutely wanted to do a birth center, even until we were kind of in it. We talk about from time to time, like, how do we even get to that decision? But so I had an appointment with an OB, just confirmed pregnancy, ultrasound, all the things. And I walk in, and all this is just our story and obviously just our opinion. But I walk in, and so it's August of 2020 or September of 2022. And without saying hello, they just like hand me a box of masks and we're like, take this and sit down. So I'm like, okay. So we sit down, we have some paperwork to fill out. I go back, and without saying anything to me about like, congratulations, whatever, it was just like, do you guys want a flu shot while you're here? And so for me, it was just a very cold experience, almost like, hey, you have this thing we're going to treat, not this exciting journey to be a part of. And so I just remember even sitting, you do the end of your visit with them with like a nurse, and she's like walking you through some nutrition stuff. And they had me make my next appointment. And we walk out, and I just kind of felt icky. And so literally across the street is the birth center. We're lucky in Charleston here to have a fantastic, just like world-class, beautiful birth center. So I was like, you know what? I just want to walk in there. I just need some good vibes. Let me see. Because I think originally my thought was I'll go to an OB maybe through 20 weeks and then switch over to the birth center for midwives. I didn't have any experience, super naive in that respect. And I think haven't had another friend do that, which is where I came to that conclusion. But we walk into the birth center, and it was a funny day. They had all been doing staff pictures. So every single person is in the waiting room dressed up. They're happy, and they look at us like they know a patient's not supposed to be there. They're like, oh, hi. And so we were just like, hey, we just came from an OB appointment. It didn't feel good. We were just coming to get good energy. And so they were like, okay, well, here's how you make an appointment, all the things. But literally from that moment, we just fell in love with them. And so I started with them from, I think I was 8 or 10 weeks, and just, we loved the midwives there. We went through, they have you go through every single one for an appointment, and then you just kind of get who's on call. In my opinion, the right person's on call. And so we loved it. I could not say enough things about Charleston Birth Center. Anyone that is in Charleston can go there. And I know they have people that even drive in from further than I probably would be comfortable with to deliver there, because it's such a beautiful, just well done venue. But anyway, we ended up going midwives all the way, and they even do my GYN stuff now, but it was a great experience. And I did not know anything about midwives going into that experience.
That's so interesting. So Bryan, what was that like for you? Were you like, what are we doing walking into a birth center? Did that make you uncomfortable at all? Or like, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think we were pretty open-handed with it as far as, and the provider we saw, the traditional OB was, well respected. Lots of friends have had great experiences in that way. So this was just an option that we were very casually considering. And we thought, well, at some point we'll go by and see it. But then, we both had this just check in our spirit. We're like, this is not the thing for us. And so I think that was one of, honestly, one of the most empowering things we did was when we said, let's just go right now. And we just need to shift the vibe right now. And so I had that memory of walking in there, and they're all color coordinated that day, to take photos, and just saying, we just need to feel better about everything. And then when we went back, they said, oh, we do remember you. You guys were, came in. And it was such a such an amazing thing. And looking back now, especially after all the education we took from them and from you, and I can't imagine wanting to do anything different. I have no regrets in the way that we've approached everything. So, yeah, I would say we were open at first, and now we're very convinced that this is the right way for our family. Unless something tells us we need to do something different.
That's awesome. So, Ashley, what was your experience with? So, how many weeks were you? I should start with that when you had that first appointment.
I think we were 8, maybe. I think 8, somewhere between 8 and 10.
Yeah. So just very newly pregnant. So they saw you just the whole way through. That's really awesome. So did you have all the traditional testing and all that kind of stuff, gestational diabetes, and did they do the group B? Like, did you choose to do any of that? And then curious too, like vaginal exams, did you choose to do that? And feel free to not answer any of these questions as well, but just curiosity.
No, all good. I'm happy to share. No, I think super grateful to you because I feel like I did get to go into a lot of those appointments empowered and, having to listen to every episode that I knew I was walking into, which is something I also loved about the birth center is about a week before our appointments, we would get an education download of like, here's the things we're going to talk about that you want to read about. So you could really go in empowered with questions. And so I could partner that with your episode and be like, okay, I want to make sure I ask these questions. So for me, I'm usually a pretty clean eater. And so when I looked at the glucola or whatever, the option is, I was like, oh, I don't want to put that in my body anyway, no matter if it's for a test. So I'm so grateful to you because I learned about the fresh test through you. So I specifically had asked about that ahead of time. And they actually carry it at the birth center. So that's one of the options that they offer. Yes. And I've actually found since then, there's a local grocery store here in town that carries it as well. But I was just grateful to have the option. So we did that test. They let you do your own group B swab yourself. And then you like pop it in a tube and kind of almost like what you're used to with like urine analysis in the doctor's office, and they handle it for you. And then trying to think, I think that's all the ones we did. And then like a typical ultrasound anatomy scan, the way our birth center does is they partner with a hospital that does that ultrasound. It's some midwives through the teaching hospital here. And so they had actually referred me to come back for a 28-week ultrasound, really for no reason other than to check growth. So I know that's not something that the birth center typically does. They usually do the 20-week and go, but we got one more extra ultrasound there. And then I actually failed my 1-hour glucose test by like 7 or something super small, which I was very surprised about, super healthy. And I just didn't expect to. So I went back and did the fresh test again for the 3-hour and passed with flying colors, all 3. Actually, by the last one, I think my blood sugar was like in the 30s. So I was feeling very weak. But all that to say, just to give encouragement to other moms, maybe that do the glucose test. If you do fail the first one, it's okay. Cause I was freaking out and, oh my gosh, I'm going to have gestational diabetes. But the 3-hour one was fine. And the other one I was super nervous about was the group B, just for all the decisions that leads to down the line if it's positive. So I was super grateful when that one was negative. And I didn't do any vaginal exams, thanks to you, just for feeling really empowered that I didn't have to. And honestly, at the birth center, I don't think that they ever asked me. And we'll get into my birth story, but I didn't really have time once we were like in the birth process. But so I never had any the whole time. But yeah, I think other than that, we did everything else.
That's awesome. All right. Talk to me about the preparation. So at what point were you like, okay, let's dive into the birth course and Bryan and I can get busy on working through this stuff?
Yeah, actually championed Bryan for this one. So the birth center has a birth course they require that you take as a first-time mom before you deliver there. And they don't want you to do it. I think it's like till maybe 32 weeks or 34 weeks. It's a little further along just so you don't, forget. And our schedule was just so busy. We were due in May and April is my birthday month. And we just had like all the family things. And I feel like we just had some leadership conferences on the weekends, things like that. And we were like, oh my goodness, because they only offer it. I think it's like the first or maybe third Saturday of the month, whatever. So Bryan was great. I introduced him to the podcast, sent him a few episodes that I had enjoyed for partners. And so he was like, let's get that. And so we jumped into the birth course, I think in like December. So I was only like 16 to 20 weeks pregnant. And so you'll just do an episode here or there. And so for us, I think it was really empowering just to have that education earlier on. And then we can always go back to your birth course, which I appreciate having access to. And then we still did the birth course at the birth center. I think I was like 30, I was closer, 34 weeks maybe. And it was just a good review. Honestly, at that birth course, I didn't really learn anything new necessarily that I hadn't learned from your course. So just super grateful to have access to it a little earlier on, so I didn't feel like I was scrambling at the end. And then as far as actual labor prep, we did red raspberry leaf tea starting, I don't know, maybe around 34, 36 weeks dates, about the same time. And then I did the 3 free exercises all the way up until the end, and some pelvic floor PT that they had encouraged me to do just to open up my hips and kind of that stretching. We didn't do evening primrose oil, but we did the tea and the dates. I think that's all the things that we did.
Awesome. So you did the 3 exercises. Were there other things that you guys did as preparation as well? Or was that kind of your just like base of what you did? Did you do any labor rehearsals? Did you use meditation? Did you do a like relaxation practice together? What did you guys do that way? And what did you do together?
Yeah, we didn't do a ton together. We did some, so Bryan actually came with me to a pelvic floor PT appointment. They have you bring your partner in if you want to. And so she went through everything hands-on with us. And so that was really helpful, I think, to translate things we had learned from you and other birth courses onto my body and be like, okay, no, this is how it feels versus just listening to it. So that was really helpful. We did some meditations, especially the ones in your birth course, and I would always fall asleep in the first like minutes. So they would play, but I would never listen all the way through. I would do them at night. And we did some like hip squeezes and that kind of thing. And I don't think we ever did an actual labor rehearsal, but I can remember listening to things on different stories from you and being like, oh, I don't think I would like that at all. Or no, I might like that. So just thinking through, but we didn't do as much labor practice.
Yeah. I mean, we practiced a few of those techniques, and all that time I was imagining myself with, a labor of however long, and it just didn't go that way. So I've got this stuff in the back. If we have more little ones, maybe I'll get to use some of those skills that we practiced. But it was at the ready. It just wasn't needed.
That's awesome. Being over prepared is a good thing. But yes, your story is a little bit different as well. And I'm excited to hear about that. Did you guys have any like favorite podcasts? And Bryan, I feel especially for you, I want to ask Dad's perspective, but Ashley too. Like, did you have any favorite podcasts or any favorite topics that you learned within the birth course that you're like, oh, that was really useful. I latched onto that. I used that throughout, or I know that this information would help somebody else.
Anything for you?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I took away was that that my role is integral and can relieve a lot of the stressful things, and then just the idea of being supportive and making the environment around us safe. I underestimated the role of, even within birth, her feeling safe. And there's all this kind of thing about pregnant women nesting and all that. It's like, well, that's real, but also it's like people just make a home for themselves anyway. But it's like the level that it takes on, and you realize it's just deeply ingrained, and in the role of being the protector, and then organizing our home and realizing I'm the one that don't need to draw boundaries, and just understand that making a safe place makes the birth so much easier. And if her body and her mind doesn't feel settled and safe, then it's going to be harder going than maybe it needs to. So I think that was one of the biggest things I took away from a lot of the guys that I listened to, that you've had on. That was a theme that I picked up on.
Yeah, I think for me, I love all the education. I think just feeling empowered to make decisions versus have things being done to you. It's things that you're, actually having informed consent about. But I also, funny enough, one of my favorites has been the Enneagram episode. So I am a 3, and I just remember listening to yours thinking like, this makes so much sense. And I feel like it really did help me explain to Bryan, I'm a performer. This is why I don't want people in my space, or, all the things that happened in those episodes. I thought they were fascinating. I love that you guys did those. So those for me were actually really helpful from just an emotional standpoint of trying to verbalize maybe why I wanted things the way that I did. But yeah, I loved all the education as well.
That's awesome. All right, let's do it. Walk me through that very first contraction all the way throughout your birth.
Oh my goodness. So we had a very normal day. I remember it was a Friday. I had been off work since I think Tuesday. So I just had some Braxton Hicks that were pretty consistent and just didn't feel comfortable being in the car. And obviously not knowing what labor would look like or be like as a first time mom, I stepped away from work on a Tuesday. And then Friday we had done normal things, went to Costco, walked around, all the things. And around 5:30, I was like, I'm going to take a nap. So I laid down and I woke up at 7. It was just like a normal menstrual cramp in the front, kind of lower. Went back to sleep, woke up at 7:20, 7:40, and then 8 o'clock. And then I realized, oh, those are all 20-minute intervals. Like, that's weird. So I went to the bathroom and had a little bit of like bloody mucus on my toilet paper. And so I remember walking in, Bryan was across the house, and I was like, I feel like I should just show you this because I feel like I might have to describe it later. I don't know what it is, but I feel like anything with blood, you should know. And then I was like, I'm going to go hop in the bath. I remember, I can't remember if it was you or someone on that wanted to shave their legs. I'm like, that sounds like a great idea. So I hopped in the bathtub, shaved my legs, was in there for a few minutes. And Bryan's like, like they were rhythmic. Things are, let's just call the midwives, let them know what's going on, see what they think. So he called. And the midwife called right back. And I was really excited with the one that was on call. I would have been happy with any of them, but I was grateful that this particular midwife was on call. And she was like, you sound good. I talked to her on the phone and I was like, hey, I'm in the bathtub. I'm working through a couple of just like really low key things. She's like, sounds good. Rest as long as you can. Call me in the morning. I said, awesome. So I got out of the bathtub and was like, I kind of want to go get in the shower and just let the warm water run down my back. That just sounded good. And I will say I had highly underestimated how intuitive your body can be, even as a first-time mom, to just tell you what to do. It is the coolest, just like out of body, but in your body experience. So while I was in the shower, things really started picking up. And I was like, okay, if this is early labor, like I expect to have, 12, maybe 18 more hours of this. This is pretty intense. And all of mine never did like front wrap around to the back. It was all in my back. And so I think that's why I was like, I'm not really sure what's going on, but the hot water feels good. So I just kind of let them run across. I think Bryan was still kind of resting in the other end of the house. And at that point I was like, hey, like, have you packed? And he was like, no. So my stuff thankfully was kind of all together on our guest bed without just like the last few things to throw in. And so he's like running around starting to pack, and I get out of the shower. Thankfully, I don't know why, I put Depends on and I went to lay in our bed, and I wanted to lay on my side, and I put a pillow in between my knees, almost like a peanut ball. I was like, I'm going to try to get some sleep, even though it was starting to get a little more intense. And at that point, I'm like, maybe you should time the contractions. That way we'll kind of see when I get to that point where we need to go to the birth center. So I'm laying on my side and I'm like, can you turn the fan on? I'm hot. I also feel nauseous, but I'm also cold. So let's put on a blanket. I had some chills. And at this point, to my first cramp, like tiny menstrual cramp, was at around like 7. This is probably around like 9 or 9:30. I kind of lost track of time. And so he's timing on the contraction. I'm kind of telling him as they're peaking, and they're picking up a lot at this point. Like we screenshotted our contraction timer because it almost just looks like it's like spastic. I mean, there's like no rhythm at this point. They're on top of each other. They are like, I can't get a break, barely. He went around to go put on his shoes and he got one shoe on. And I'm like, I need you back over here. And so I'm like squeezing his hand. He has one shoe on. And I was doing what I thought I was doing my best to do, like kind of breathing through them. Because in our birth class at the birth center, there was like a contraction breathing and then like a pushing breathing. So I'm like, my body wants to do pushing breathing, but I'm trying to do just like breathe through this contraction. And I don't remember what time it is at this point, but he's like, I'm going to call your sister, who was the only other person I wanted here for delivery. And I was like, I don't think so. Don't bother her. Like, it's a Friday night, whatever. He was like, oh, I'm going to call her. So we call her. He's like, I think you might want to head this way. So she's like, okay. So this is around like 9:30. She's packing up. He calls the birth center back. And Emily hears me working through some contractions, our midwife, and she was like, "Oh, I'm going to meet you there. Let's meet there like in the next 30 minutes." So about this time, what I thought I had totally pooped the bed. It was like a loud gush. And now I know it was my water breaking. It was like a loud popping gush. So I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Like I didn't want to come home to dirty sheets, all that. So I was like, let me at least go get in the shower and rinse off before we go to the birth center. And then when I got back into the shower, I realized, oh my gosh, that was my water. So I like just got back out, popped onto pins again, had I think 3 more contractions on the way to the car, got in the car. The car ride honestly wasn't that bad. I remember a lot of people saying like the car ride was terrible. And I don't know if I was just laboring down, but I'm literally like holding on to like the pull bar in the car. And I just remember like I had to push. I couldn't help it. And I'm like, babe, this is crazy. Like this is early labor. And I can't help it. So we got across we had to drive across a bridge in Charleston. So thankfully this is like 11 o'clock at night. So there's no traffic. I remember having a sip of water. I was like, I'm going to need to hydrate. Bryan ran a red light because it was pretty intense. And we got
it was a right on red. Let's go. I mean,
And then we pull in at the birth center and our midwife is waiting for us at the door with a wheelchair. And we park in like the expectant mother's parking, which I was so excited to use at every appointment. I was like, we're going to get to park in that spot sometime. So I stand up out of the car and she was like, can you sit in the wheelchair? We'll go upstairs. We'll get in the tub. And I was like, I cannot sit on that, but I will walk. If you'll give me a minute, like to work through this one more contraction, I'll try. So at that contraction, I was like, I'm crowning. So I'm in the parking lot. It's 11, probably 15 at this point. And she was like, are you sure? I was like, yep. And there's the ring of fire. And I'm like pretty calm, like kind of praying through it, breathing through it. Like, thank you, God, for these contractions. Like I'm one more closer. And she was like, I said, Emily, his head is out. Like it's I can feel it. It's out. And she was like, okay, well, do you want to do this out here? And I was like, yep. And so she pulls my pants down. I'm leaning against the wheelchair. And then Bryan is like holding Jack's head. And he's like, babe, he has your ears. And I'm like, great. So one more contraction, the rest of him came out. Bryan got to catch him. And our midwife was like, does anyone have a clock or watch, like, so I can call time of birth? Because she obviously wasn't expecting me to have labor or delivery in the parking lot. So Bryan was able to like wipe the vernix off on his shirt, check his phone, call a time. And then they rolled the wheelchair behind me, passed Jack through. All I could think about was skin to skin. So I like strip everything off in the parking lot, like skin to skin. And the placenta delivered within the next like 30 seconds. Thank God I had on Depends because I just fell right in there. So we just rode up in the elevator, like baby on me. I feel like blood was everywhere. Placenta in my Depends. My nurse was like, you should send them a commercial. Like it's very strong.
They were strong.
Thing. Of course, Bryan takes a picture. There's like blood all in the parking lot. But going back to the platelet story from earlier, so I had to have labs done on, I think like on Tuesday. And that was going to be what decided if I got to deliver at the birth center, if they were going to be too low and I had to go to the hospital. And I was just like, I'm going to deliver this baby at home. Like I'm not going to deliver in a hospital. And thankfully, they came back. I think I had to be at like 80 or something for them to deliver, and they came back at 81. And I will say for anyone listening, if that happens to you, the week before that, they gave me a steroid pack, which I took and felt crazy on, just a normal like Medrol dose pack, but it didn't help. So this was my second week of labs. But what helped was a papaya leaf extract that I just got on Amazon because I couldn't find it anywhere locally. It's not papaya leaf, it's just the actual extract. And it turned my platelets around to start going back up. So that for me is how, thankfully, I got to deliver at the birth center. But if anybody has that was something I hadn't heard before, and that was incredibly helpful. So we went upstairs and I just got to do my golden hour. The midwife checked everything and I didn't have to do any stitches. And then Bryan got an hour. And at that point we had to call my sister and say, hey, just come to the birth center. Your nephew's here. But they were just the best. Like they were just so kind, and they didn't ask to touch him or take him away for like 2 hours. And they were like, hey, do you mind if we weigh him and wash the blood out of his hair? So they did do that for me and help me get a shower. They washed my clothes during my golden hour. Like I was just blown away at just how kind that they were. And then I guess around 3:30, they're like, hey, okay, well, you can go get your car seat and you guys can head home. So we loaded him up in the car seat and we were back home by like 4:30 in the morning and just had time as a family. So it was a whirlwind that I didn't expect, but I firmly believe that all the education and preparation I had done, even like perineal stretching, I didn't mention that earlier for labor prep, like it was all just so helpful. And I just wouldn't trade anything. I got everything I wanted. And then for us, we are believers in Jesus. And so I feel like he just gave us that extra special, like, you worked hard, I'm going to reward you. Like it was short and it was fun. And then it was like this wild adventure at the same time. So I loved every single second of it.
That's so neat. I think one of my favorite parts of that story was your midwife. And she's like, do you want to do this here? Like, it wasn't some like emergent, like, oh no, hold the head in. Let's just wait till we're inside. It was like, what do you want? Like, are you cool? Or would you like to go inside? And she was probably super calm about it. And
Absolutely.
I love that. I'm curious, Bryan, like your take on things and how you were feeling as she's like working through these contractions. And then all of a sudden there's a head coming out. And like, what was this like from Dad's perspective?
Well, looking back now, and he's 11 months this week, it's such a blur, and it felt that way in the moment because it just accelerated at such a pace that, and more often than not, right, you hear, first time mom, it's going to take some time. Even our midwife, she said, hey, get some rest if you can, eat something if you want, all these things. And so that's where my head was. And I thought, okay, I'm going to kind of piddle around and get some stuff and whatever. And then it just, took on a whole another dimension. And, and we laugh about this now, but I was expecting that we're in early contractions. I was like, we're nowhere close to transition. And I later told Ashley, I said, I know you to be you're a pretty tough chick. And I did not expect to hear the sounds from you that I heard that early. She said, if you had told me that in that moment, we would have had some problems. So anyway, so it just speaks to how quickly things went. But, and the fact that, even going over the bridge, I remember I said, it sounds like you're like pushing and like, just remember not to put pressure. And then she said, I feel like I have to. I'm like, okay, cool. Whatever. I'm like, yeah, you're sitting in the car or whatever. So that was just so wild. And then, yeah. And she's asked me about this in the past, that what was going through your mind? I was like, I don't know. I mean, the biggest thought is don't drop him, like that is the biggest number one thing is like, do not drop this boy. I think, you get, you get agility and dexterity you never knew you had when the stakes are that high. But, and the support we had there at the birthplace, at the birth center. And we laughed too. Later, we realized that, I love Buc-ee's gas stations, and her sister stopped at Buc-ee's. She was shopping for brisket sandwiches for me at the exact moment he was born. So, I mean, all these little things, that just made it so good. But when I tell people the timeline, that from a cramp at 7, birth at 11:19, and then we were all asleep at the house by 6 a.m. It's so unusual, and it's funny. We've met other expectant moms. And so I'll be chit chatting with the dad, I'll be like, hey man, you never know what's going to happen. And I was like, believe listen to the people you're listening to, and also listen to this funny story. And then their eyes get real big and say, but that's not going to happen. You'll have plenty of time and you'll be packed. You'll have both your shoes on and whatever. But I couldn't have predicted it, but it's quite a story. And, he's a special little dude. And at this point we're like, yeah, this all makes sense. He's pretty forward motion, in general.
So can you guys say, looking back, can you see the signs now where you're like, oh yeah, I was definitely in full labor. I was definitely in transition. Were you able to see that in retrospect?
Absolutely. Yeah, the timeline was just so fast. But looking back, I remember so many stories on here that you're just like, oh yeah, duh, it was transition. Looking back, I was like, yeah, chills, hot, cold, nauseous, obviously. But I think because we were only a couple hours in, I was like, there's no way. Um, yeah, my biggest goal going into labor was to try to get through transition at home. And so really just go deliver at the birth center, which we obviously did. But once I figured out that we had done that at home, I was like, man, it's so empowering. Like we did it. We did transition at home together and it was just the coolest. So yeah, it was incredible.
So do you think like babies later, you'll just do a home birth rather than go to the birth center?
Great question. I told Bryan he better be ready.
Well, for sure. For sure, we need to be mentally prepared for it. And we were doing a mental inventory. Do we know where all the midwives at the birth center live? You know, just to calculate who's the quickest one to get to us. You know,
For real.
Yeah, I think we would definitely think about it in the future. At this point, I love like going, delivering them and then coming back home to kind of retreat. But also hearing your story, like it's just so beautiful.
Yeah.
And, now it's funny, we are thinking about having a second one soon. And so it's like, you just imagine going all through that, but we have a toddler now. So it's like, just things are different your second time around. So I'm certainly not opposed to it.
Yeah.
It felt very, like you said, I felt very safe here. So
we don't even know what it's like because we imagine you might use the birthing tub, but we never got there. And so it was funny. At one point, we were sitting on the bed, having our family sweet time. And our midwife said, well, I guess I'll drain the tub.
That's awesome.
So we'll keep that out there for, maybe we'll find out what that's like in the future using the tub.
All right. Tell me a little about your contractions. So I would love to hear about how they felt in the beginning. And I know they progressed quickly. And so how that progression, where you like the intensity of them and if you felt them any different, and then how you worked through them, what you felt was the most comforting thing for you. You said, I'm a believer in Jesus. It makes me wonder, you were probably praying a lot, but I would love to hear a little bit about that or kind of the mental things you were telling yourself. And then if Bryan was supporting you in any way through those, what was helpful for you as they progressed. And also I'm curious, and I can ask this next because I'm giving you a lot of information right now, but I'd be curious to know how they progressed in time because you said you were keeping track of them on an app as well. So like what they were feeling like when they were this many minutes apart and then like how many minutes apart they were and how long they were before you left and in the car and stuff.
Yeah. So just like I said at the beginning, super low key menstrual cramp, like nothing I haven't ever not experienced before. And then honestly, by the time I moved so for me, the shower was just like the greatest gift, as hot as I could get it. And I would just kind of let it run across my back and back up through a contraction. And that just felt great. And I didn't expect it to all be back labor. So I never really felt anything on the front the entire time. So all of mine was really intense in the back. I wouldn't even say, like I hear people say on here, it wasn't painful. I have to agree. I wouldn't even like call it pain. It was just intense. And the water just felt so good. And then, transitioning back into our bed, kind of the same, like I honestly don't even remember how we went from like 20 minutes apart to on top of each other. I feel like it all was just such a blur, but like they were very manageable in the tub before I got in the shower, almost like a Braxton Hicks, like I had been having, but maybe with a little bit more intensity. But by like that second hour, they were just on top of each other. I don't even know I don't know. I think it was more than 5 to 1 to 1 to 1. It was just so intense. And it was just more of like a wave on a wave on a wave. Breathing was crucial and trying to breathe deep, but also Bryan, I was really grateful, gave me permission to be pretty vocal. And I'm not a super vocal person usually, but it just felt so good just to be like, just loud and to get it out with the sound. But yeah, all mine was back kind of all the way down. So, and I asked when he came out, I was like, which way was he facing? And Bryan was like, he was facing back. So I guess at some point he had turned his way down because you hear sometimes with back labor, they're just facing. But however he was working his way down, it was all in my back. So I'm interested to hear on a different labor on how or feel how it feels the other way too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just describe it as like really intense waves that got more and more on top of each other. And honestly, I feel like by the time we got the app out, we were in transition. And so I think they were just so on top of each other at that point. I don't know if you remember anything differently than I do.
Well, yeah, I just remember. Well, I remember that you said somebody we listened to said, "Well, she'll tell you when they start and when they stop." And then I think that wait, there's another one. It's like eventually I just chucked the phone across the room because there wasn't time. But um, I was just amazed at really coming through it, being really vocal. I mean, it seemed like if you could squeeze my hand a lot, it's like it gave you a place to put the pressure, and then it seems like the intensity of the squeeze that's going on had a place to go instead of being more, tension down where he was. So
Yeah. And we did we tried one hip squeeze for my transition from the shower to transition on the bed, and I did not like it. I don't know if it was because of back labor or what, but it did not feel good like I thought it probably would. So that's really the only like mechanical thing that I feel like that we really tried. And I do remember I did try sitting kind of backwards on the toilet, leaning over, and that hurt a lot too. So I didn't stay there, but like maybe one contraction. But it was like you said, it just felt good to feel empowered with other options. And my body kind of moved itself once every at least 30 minutes without me having to really be coached through it. It was a really incredible experience just to lean into.
So what kind of positions did you end up using or utilizing that felt better?
Yeah, so in the shower, I just kind of leaned over. We have a shower bench in there. When I got to the bed, I was side lying almost with like a pillow as a peanut ball. And then honestly, by the time we got out of the car, I sat in the car on the way to the birth center, but I delivered him standing up. So I don't know if gravity just kicked in or what, but I was just standing, kind of leaning over the wheelchair. And those are really the only few I feel like that I was able to get into that felt just right.
Yeah. And then do you remember what was happening inside of your head? Like, we know that we go to a completely different place where there's some positive things that you were saying to yourself.
Yeah, I just remember like praising God and thanking him through every single contraction. I don't even think I thought through like, okay, one more closer to my baby, but I just remember thinking like, you can, you are, you will. That was like something that I had told myself through this, like you are doing it and you did one, you can do another one. And I just remember kind of taking it one contraction at a time. And I honestly could not believe it when I crowned. I was like, oh my gosh. Like the first thing I said to Jack when I pulled him on my chest, I was like, we did it. Like we did it. It was like something our first thing that we did together. And it was just the coolest. But I just remember being so grateful to get to go through that experience. And I'm kind of like you, I love labor. As weird as it sounds, like I loved it. Like this time I feel like the first contraction, I'll be so excited. But I really was just so grateful truly to get to go through it. And honestly, very grateful when I realized I was crowning. I was like, okay, this is the victory lap. We got this.
That's so cool. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for being here. You know, I love to end these episodes with your best advice for moms and best advice for dads. So I'd love to hear from you guys, like from each of you. Like Ashley, what would you say to moms? What would you say to dads? If you could like sum it up in a sentence. And then Bryan, same question.
Yeah, I think for moms, a theme of my story has been just trust your intuition. I think it is why I feel like from as soon as we found out we were pregnant, just there's something about that mama bear like intuition that is so real and just so connected to that little spirit inside of you. So I think especially through labor, like lean into that, but also just random things like the cravings I had that I never normally eat in everyday life, that when you look into it, it was like, oh, he was telling me that he needed vitamin A or extra calcium this week as his bones were forming or whatever it is. And so I think just really leaning into that intuition. And then for dads, I think just being really present. Bryan was so encouraging along the way about like, let's do the birth course. And our schedule allows for him. He was at all of my appointments. And, like he said, he was able to do the grocery shopping. And there was just things that he could do that he was so involved the whole time, obviously casting him when he was born. So I think just being there and being present. And, for me, that was just like such a great gift along the way to feel like we were really doing this together. So I felt super supported.
Yeah. Well, I'm hesitant to give advice to moms, but I would say, if you're a woman who isn't used to saying with clarity what you need and what you're feeling, there's no better time than to press into that than when you're, growing your baby. And then for the dads, I would say it's pretty easy. I think we alluded to this earlier to feel like in this in between, during the pregnancy, that you're not all that crucial to what's going on. But it couldn't be further from the truth, because your first job is to protect her, and just trust that when your child is here, you get that reward of beginning the bonding, because she's got that head start of bonding with with the little one, and it just gets stronger and stronger the more time you spend with your little one. So if you feel at all disconnected, or like you should be feeling more, just focus on her. Whatever she says is what she needs, and if it doesn't make sense, well, then just chalk it up to her blood is being used for more things in her brain all the time, and just trust that it's totally worth all of the things that you're working through together. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty amazing thing.
I love it. Excellent advice. For those listening too, Ashley actually has a podcast that she started. And I know we didn't talk about me that I was going to say any of this here, but really quick, just a quick plug for your podcast. Because if you guys have not heard it, I was able to interview with her on there, which I thought was really fun. But I also just love the work that she's doing. So I want you guys to hear a little bit about that before we jump off.
Thanks, Steph. I appreciate that. Yeah, we are so honored to have you. So yeah, that one you can just connect with at Unlock Your Dream Podcast, and it's on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, all the things. But really just a place I want to bring encouragement to people who have a dream, a lot of entrepreneurs on that space as well. So just a place where people can just find hope and hopefully some tangible tips and tricks through people's stories that allows them to see some dreams that they have realized.
And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. My favorite part of that, or at least that I'm thinking right now with the people that are listening, is once we become pregnant and we become moms, at least this has been my experience and I've seen it a lot myself, it's easy to get lost in all I am as a mom. And I don't mean that in a bad way, because becoming a mom is one of the most beautiful things that we can do. And it's not, quote, like all that we are, but we get in that space, and it's hard for us to see anything else or to remember that we enjoyed anything or had other interests or other things that really lit us up, or even other callings that we have coming to us. And so I love that space, because I think it's the perfect thing for women to be listening to who are pregnant and postpartum right now, because yes, you are a mom and you still have dreams. You are an individual and you have a story to tell. And so being a mom is just the beginning of, the rest of your life. There's a lot more to it than that. So I appreciate what you're doing, and I love that you're doing it. And so links for that will absolutely be within the show notes. So thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Bryan, for being here with me today. This has been excellent, and I can't wait for other moms to hear it.
Thanks, Stephanie. It's such a gift.
Thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful.
If you loved what you heard today, the very best way to support this podcast and help other moms to find it is to leave a quick review. I read one at the beginning of the episodes, and I would love for yours to be next. And if you're ready for even more pregnancy, birth, and postpartum goodness, come join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I will hold your hand and walk you through pregnancy and birth step by step, so you're totally prepared for a birth you'll love. See you next week.